vai ser mais um Entre Amigues, que não é só Entre Amigues hoje. A gente também é tecnopolítica ao mesmo tempo. A gente não sequestrou o Sérgio, ele também está aqui conosco em espírito, em apoio.
O Sérgio não pôde vir, então estamos aqui ocupando o lugar dele de host. Então é um episódio que mistura dois públicos muito interessantes, que tem super a ver com a nossa convidada, né? Convidada super especial, primeiro episódio internacional do Entre Amigues. Não sei se Tecnopolítica tem episódio internacional, provavelmente sim.
Sim.
Então, apresentando os podcasts, né, para ambos os públicos, no Entre Amigues a gente procura amplificar as vozes LGBTQIA+, né? Às vezes a gente amplifica até demais. E a gente acaba navegando nessa diversidade dentro da diversidade. Então, acho que aqui a gente tem uma boa conexão, porque na tecnologia, como muito se fala, né, tem muito homem. E a gente precisa mudar isso, né? Uhum. E o Tecnopolítica acessa esse público de uma maneira muito especial, né? E traz também uma diversidade para a Tecnopolítica, para a tecnologia como um todo, né? Bem interessante. Então, o podcast da Tecnopolítica procura explorar os temas do momento, procura trazer pessoas pesquisadoras, né? E fazer com que a tecnologia não fique num lugar estagnado, apenas comercial, que ela chegue a um lugar que a gente fala mais político, mas também com mais profundidade, né? Com mais significado, enfim.
Reflexão, crítica.
Mais crítica, reflexão. Então, esses públicos se encontram aqui e a gente vai procurar nessa conversa também responder a alguns dos anseios, né, que os dois públicos têm e que eu também tenho, e acho que o McKenzie também tem, né? A gente tem uma trajetória muito ligada à tecnologia e gênero. Então, vamos nessa. Primeiro agradecer, né? Agradecer o Sérgio, a Joyce, né? Que se disponibilizaram esse espaço do Tecnopolítica para a gente, né? Falar com vocês. E agradecer também quem viabilizou a vinda da McKenzie para o Brasil, né? A FLIPEI. A McKenzie estava na FLIPEI agora, numa mesa com a Erika Hilton. As editoras Funilaria, Sob Influência, a Revista Rosa, N1, Editora N1. E, bom, McKenzie, né? Australiana, nova-iorquina, mãe, marxista, trans, hacker, professora, escritora. Responsa hoje. Escreveu os livros Manifesto Hacker, o livro O Capital Está Morto, Filosofia para Aranhas.
Então ali, ó, dá para ver eles ali, ó.
Certo.
Alguns deles ali.
E também um livro Raven, recente, né, que está com uma perspectiva muito interessante, uma coisa que a gente fez ontem, que a gente pode aí contar no meio da conversa. E tem, acho que, 15 livros publicados por aí, né? Muitos mundialmente. Formada em jornalismo, certo? Lá no comecinho, formada em jornalismo. Professora de mídia na New School, em Nova York. E fez sua transição, seu desbloqueio de maneira tardia, certo? Eu também falo assim, tardia, né? Mas quando que é o tempo certo também, né? Não sabemos. Então, ela está em São Paulo para a FLIPEI, né? Esteve nessa mesa com a Erika, onde ela colocou a palavra hacker na boca da Erika, assim, de uma maneira. A Erika não parava de falar hackeamento, hacker. Então, McKenzie, muito bem-vinda. É uma alegria imensa ter você aqui e ter essa oportunidade de conhecer melhor nesses dias. Obrigada por aceitar o convite. O que você acha que a gente começa? Porque, assim, tem tantos tópicos, dá vontade de gravar 3 horas com ela.
Sim.
Eu acho que, assim, os livros que ela traz, eu posso arriscar fazer um resuminho dos seus livros? Um tweet, assim? Porque eu acho que 4 deles orientam muito bem a conversa, né? Especialmente o Manifesto Hacker, O Capital Está Morto, claro, né? Que são os livros principais também da sua vinda aqui, que a gente vai fazer uma outra conversa amanhã. Mas também outros que a gente pode entrar em detalhes. No Manifesto Hacker, a McKenzie traz... Me complementa, por favor, né? Não quero ousar aqui falar da sua teoria, só para a gente começar. Ela fala sobre uma espécie de pós-capitalismo, né? Onde acaba explicando ponto a ponto como a gente foi lá do feudalismo até o chamado vetorialismo, né? Que é um tipo de capitalismo com aspectos assim de vigilância, capitalismo de plataforma, né? Que seria esse capitalismo vigente. A ascensão de 2 classes também, né? Então, a gente tem, por um lado, uma classe vetorialista, que se sobrepõe à chamada burguesia, né? E assume o controle, digamos assim, a dominação desse mundo atual, e a classe hacker, né? Que não é só programadores, né? Não é só pessoas programadoras, mas pessoas que produzem informação, produzem conhecimento, né? Então essa disputa entre vetorialistas e hacker apontariam assim uma noção diferente do que a gente tem como conflito atual. E é importante frisar, né, que esses vetorialistas são essas pessoas que acabam controlando o sistema, no fim das contas, né? E por que não nossas vidas, talvez, já que hoje esses sistemas também são sistemas que geram subjetividade, de certa forma, né? Então, esse primeiro livro é um manual ponto a ponto, né? Eu senti assim, você vai ponto a ponto entendendo essa teoria e até num nível assim circular e pouco a pouco compreendendo todo esse novo cenário. Já o Capital Está Morto, ali podemos mostrar aqui também, né? Temos aqui, ó, o Manifesto Hacker. Olha que capa linda, gente.
Sim, mostra pra
esse da funilaria. Já o outro, o Capital Está Morto, que também tem uma capa bafônica, né? Ele dá uma aprofundada nessa teoria do vetorialismo, marca mais fortemente o que está acontecendo hoje nesse pós-capitalismo, né? E gosto também de uma parte que ele confronta, né, uma visão assim do marxismo como religião, um marxismo ortodoxo, assim, né? E torna muito familiar para a gente o que é esse novo tipo de capitalismo. Para a gente, assim, que vive nos centros urbanos, né, que não está em um contexto como o capitalismo anterior, né, e o marxismo ortodoxo tratam, né? Já nos dois outros livros, o Raving e o sobre amor, sexo, a gente tem uma McKenzie diferente. E é isso que acho que a gente pode explorar bastante nessa conversa, né? Porque a gente que fez transição tem muito marcada na vida, assim, o que acontecia antes, né? E o que veio depois, é um novo nascimento, assim. Então, a gente percebe nos livros dela também como houve um hiato e, de repente, uma coisa diferente, né? Muito diferente. No Amor e Sexo são cartas, né? De quando ela era criança, são cartas para ela mesma, portanto. Tem até uma deusa trans nesse livro. E há essa conversa sobre o que é essa temporalidade trans diferente, né? Então, como que você, depois da transição, acessa memórias anteriores, conversa, né, com essas memórias. E, ao mesmo tempo, ela vai entrar em detalhes na nossa conversa, mas no Raving, né, o último livro... É o último livro, McKenzie, Raving?
I think so.
Yeah? It's too much.
Probably the...
So many.
I forget what order they came out in.
Mas no Raving tem essa ajuda também para a pessoa em transição que acessa um universo diferente ali e volta a ver um significado na escrita, né? O Raving traz uma noção diferente, uma dimensão diferente que a gente não viu nos outros livros e tem tudo a ver com transição, parece, né? Com acessar umas comunidades que suspendem de alguma forma essas normas, né? Esses sistemas de opressão e de controle que gerenciam nossos corpos no mundo real, não nesses mundos criados para lazer, enfim, diversão, vida, né? De outra forma, vivenciar a cultura. Essa foi a pequena introdução sobre McKenzie, gente. Desculpa, é que estamos na frente de uma espécie de entidade aqui de tecnologia e gênero, então foi um pouco longa. Fala um pouquinho, Amanda, que falei demais.
Ai, não, quem tem que falar agora é a convidada.
Exato, então, já joga para ela.
Sim, não, vamos lá, McKenzie. A gente conseguiu, ao desenhar, né, esse caminho de livros que representam a sua trajetória vindo aqui no Brasil, né? E os quais a gente achou que fariam muito sentido a gente tratar hoje no podcast. Justamente porque eles representam esse caminho pelo qual você passou também na sua vida, né? Eu acho que uma das coisas mais bacanas da gente trazer para o Entre Amigues, mais do que só falar sobre a sua trajetória acadêmica, ou você como professora, é você como pessoa, e como uma pessoa que faz parte da comunidade LGBT, e que teve um caminho muito particular, mas que não é só seu, pelo qual muitas pessoas passam, ou gostariam de passar, estão ali nas suas próprias cabeças, tentando sair desses lugares que são restritivos, que às vezes a gente mesmo se impõe, né? Então, eu queria que você trouxesse um pouco dessa perspectiva, assim, de como que foi esse caminho de escrever livros dentro dessa sua trajetória, que também é de transição de gênero.
Yeah, I think the writing was the most important thing to me. And I really wanted to focus on creating the conditions that would enable me to write. And that meant a lot of sacrifices, and I sacrificed the possibility of transition to be able to write, and some other things too. Like, that wasn't the only thing. But at some point, it was like, I'm done with that. I just have to live my life how I need to live it. And so the moment appeared. So I think of all the things that there's always like this cluster of things that describe me before I appear, and the one that matters is writer. Like, that's also my gender and my job and my vocation and my spirituality. Like, it's writer. Like, that's the kind of the key to it. And the writing breaks down in actually like 5 or 6, like separate chunks, and I won't go into all that. But one key one, and this is what's being translated into Portuguese here now, is this question of what if this isn't even capitalism anymore, it's something worse? Like, how is that conceivable? So, capitalism hasn't gone away. That's still a huge chunk of social relations. And let's not forget, under that is a sort of landlord-farmer system that's not exactly capitalism either. It's about rent extraction. So there's already 2 political economies nested together. What if there was a third that had now attached itself like a sort of limpet onto capitalism and the agrarian commodity economy? So it's funny that Hacker Manifesto has just come out in Portuguese because it's 20 years old. But, not to be too vain about it, but I reread it when it was being for the translation. I'm like, oh yeah, like, I got some things wrong. But the sort of general idea was like, yeah, I think people are starting to figure that out, that maybe we need a different language to sort of start thinking about how the advanced level of political economy transitioned, and what did it transition into, and how is it worse, and why is it making everyone's, like, most people think things are getting worse, right? So yeah, it's bad. So let's sort of think that through. And Capitalist Dead restates and updates and critiques my own position a little bit. I think whatever I got wrong in Hacker Manifesto, I'm trying to address in Capitalist Dead. And you might think, oh, she got things wrong in the earlier book. And it's like, I actually think that's a good thing. It meant that the theses were falsifiable by history. Like, I'm suspicious of theories that can never be wrong. So it's like, oh yeah, like, I made some propositions and I think some still hold, and history refuted some other ones. Actually a good thing. So yeah, that addresses that sort of body of work. And like, I'm waiting a little bit for people to catch up with it, which has sort of started to happen. But in the meantime, it's like, oh, I came out as trans, and that really interrupted the writing process. Like, transition's real. Like, it changes a lot of things about your body and how you think and feel. And it changed the writing. And I actually couldn't write in the same way. So I started writing in a different way. And the challenge for me now might be to sort of bring all of those strands together a little bit. So I think there's sort of a break. And the books like Raving and Love and Money, Sex and Death are sort of like a slightly different project for a while. And then maybe I'll come back and put all those things together.
A gente queria entrar justamente nesse ponto, né, sobre como a transição acaba detonando na gente, despertando na gente processos, né? Por exemplo, quando eu fiz a minha, eu lembrei que eu assaltava o armário da minha avó quando era pequena para encontrar ali alguma coisa que eu já sentia necessidade de expressar, de me comunicar, né, no mundo através das roupas de uma maneira mais feminina. Eu tinha esquecido isso, né, na fase adulta, assim, antes da transição, e aí fui lembrar depois da transição. Lembro também que eu, pós-transição, assim, consegui revisitar experiências que não eram heterossexuais da pré-adolescência, da adolescência, só que sem preconceito, que era algo inimaginável dentro da heteronormatividade, né? Então, detalhe, né, assim, a maioria dos homens tem essas experiências e vão negar até a morte, tá? A maioria dos homens cis héteros. Então, bom que isso fique claro aí para as outras pessoas, que essa masculinidade não é assim, né? Essa heterossexualidade não é assim tão sólida quanto parece. Mas é isso, parece que a gente pega nesse momento o corpo e faz um jailbreak, assim, um unlock, né? Pra pegar essa lógica de celulares, né? Parece que a gente quebra o dispositivo e começa a... Tem que formatar um pouco o conteúdo, mas o conteúdo ainda está lá e, ao mesmo tempo, você começa a conseguir instalar novos programas, né? Começa a mexer, assim, em toda a dinâmica de pensamento, tem memórias que você resgata. Acho que você passa um pouco isso, né? Quando você encontra nas raves esse lugar pro novo eu, né? E a escrita parece já não ter sentido pro velho eu. Queria que você falasse um pouco sobre isso, assim, mais detalhes de como foi isso para você, né? Essa coisa das memórias reativadas, visitações que você fez ao seu passado e como essa transição foi acontecendo em detalhe, assim, no trabalho também.
I don't know how it is in Portuguese, but in English there's a fairly standard form of the transgender memoir, and I'd read some of these books and I didn't relate to them. And the standard form of the memoir is sort of, and I'll just restrict it to trans women, but there's also trans memoirs as well. But I always knew I was a woman. I played with dolls as a little girl. And, you know, I didn't know what to do about it. I tried everything. And then I met my surgeon and I got my surgery. And then, and thanks to my surgeon, now it's fine. And I just didn't relate to that story. Like, I didn't always know. Like, I knew something was up, but I didn't know what it was. So I read these and I'd be like, oh, that's not actually my life. So that's not, so maybe I'm not trans because I don't fit this standard version of the story, you know? So one of the things I wanted to do in Love and Money, Sex and Death is sort of approach it a little bit differently, which is, you know what, maybe there's really lots of different ways that people come to their transness. So maybe there's lots of different kinds of story that we need. And certainly my experience is the making sense of my transition is retrospective. You know, I can say, yeah, I like to play with dolls when I was a kid, but I also like to play with trucks. Mm-hmm. What do I do with the two things, you know? Like I could selectively make it seem like, yes, I was always a girl. Mm-hmm. And for some people that's very important, so I'm not negating that that's some people's story. It's just not mine, and it's not some other trans people's either. So it's like, no, it's more an act of will. No, it's like something is pushing me to do this. I'll do it and figure out later what a story is that makes sense in my life. And a lot of, particularly when I went on hormones, like a lot of memories started coming back in a different way. Like my emotional connection to my own memory changed. And I wanted to sort of address that a little bit. Because, you know, like a lot of trans people, I spent time in the forums and that sort of thing. And everyone is so focused on how hormones are going to make them change how they look. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, and it does, and that's important. Also going to change how you feel. It's going to change your sexuality and your emotional life, and you're going to have to deal with that. And let's have that conversation a little bit, you know. So I wanted to do some of that work. Another piece of it is there was this sort of double bind in getting access to care for a lot of trans people because the medical profession was not in the business of either dealing with gay people or making anybody gay after they transitioned. So for a long time, if you want to get access to care, you had to basically say you had no sex life at all because it was a trick question where both answers were wrong. You know, and I'll just use the example of trans women, you know, so it's like, do you have sex with men? Oh, then you're gay and we don't want to deal with you because we don't deal with homosexuals. Do you have sex with women? Oh, then we would be making you a lesbian and we're not in the business of doing that. The only correct answer is you don't have sex, but you will have sex with men later and you'll be a proper heterosexual couple, you know, in the suburbs. And you will disappear. You will change your name and move to another town and disappear and no one will ever know. Like that was trans life in America. I don't know, maybe different here, but so there's sort of like this suppressed conversation around transsexuality and that some of us found transness through sexuality, and that's okay. Like that was the thing that was very suppressed. So in some of this writing, I wanted to sort of address that part as well. You know, like some people find it through how you like to have sex, and that's great, you know. And maybe that's a thread for the rest of your life, and you can figure the rest out from that part, you know. Raving came about because, like a lot of trans women, I have a trans mother, who's younger than me. It's different to like the ballroom scene and the Black and Latin trans women have a more organized structure. There's a sort of informal network that, you know, sort of a white trans woman like me would have, but where someone is my trans mother, who's just came out before I did and has figured it out a little ahead of me, you know, even though she's much younger than me. But I was talking to her and saying, you know, look, the transition's going great. I feel so much better on hormones. Like, I'm not angry all the time, and I'm not like the world is not, you know, like I can deal with my body, but there's some low-level dysphoria that I just know nothing's going to fix. Like I know, you know, like dressing differently and makeup, and it'll get so far. I know surgery might help it, but there's something that's just so ambient that the only thing that works is dancing, you know, like if I can just lose myself on the dance floor, I'm back in my body and I feel okay. And my trans mum is like, girl, you are coming to the rave tonight. Bitch, be at my apartment at 2 p.m., at 2 a.m., sorry. And I'm like, okay.
2 p.m. is the after.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And I'm like, I don't usually go out at 2 a.m., you know, or I didn't in those days. Yeah, and I got to the party and I'd had experience of techno in Berlin in the 90s, and I didn't really understand it then, but I sort of came back early in my transition. I'm like, oh, this totally makes sense. Like I totally get dancing to this music, and I totally get this community of people. And even though it tends to be a younger crowd than me, it's like, I want more of this. And so, yeah, like it was basically all I was doing was, I go to raves like every weekend, every other weekend. But I wasn't writing anymore. Like I couldn't write, you know, like hormones fixed my life, but it destroyed the writing for a minute there, like for 3 years, like nothing worked. And yeah, I had helped a friend launch a book series that was called Practices. It got approved by the press by vaguely promising that I'd write a book for the series, never intending to do it. And the editor, Margaret Grebowitz, called me up and said, oh, someone dropped out. You know, commissioned 4 books, one dropped out, I need 4 books. Can you write a book in about 3 months to go in the series? I have a bit of a tendency to mania. You know, I kind of get this sense that I can do anything. I've had to learn not to involve other people in this state. And in a fit of mania, I said, I can write a book in 3 months. I'm like, I haven't written anything for 3 years. Like what did I just do? I just signed a contract, you know.
Isso antes do ChatGPT ainda.
Sorry?
That's before ChatGPT, yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But it just came very quickly, you know. I told the editor, this is all the book could be about because this is all I'm actually doing, you know. And she was a bit wary, but I sent her some drafts and she's like, oh yeah, that's your practice. Like your practice is rave. So what is that? And why is it a space where queer and trans people often feel free and alive? And, you know, it's not a utopia. Everybody's problems come with them to the party, you know. But it's a space of working that out. You know, it's a space where we can be together with relative freedom and relative safety to get free. And I feel like that's kind of important. And particularly in an era when everyone is on their cell phone all the time, whatever is the possibility of a practice that takes you away from that takes you back into your body and back into being with others, I think that's kind of an important thing, indirectly politically, but culturally, socially, let's be back together and figure our stuff out, body to body, face to face. There's an intimacy to dancing that's a skill you can learn that you take everywhere else in your life, And I'd always liked that, but I got better at it and more intense at it. I mean, I'm still a terrible dancer, but I don't have moves. That's why techno is great. It asks so little.
That's false.
Techno asks very little of you as a dancer, but it's an endurance approach, how doing it for a very long time gets you into certain kinds of physical and mental states at the same time where you can get free.
Acho que não tem como não pensar na metáfora do filme Matrix, né? Quando o Neo acorda fora da Matrix e começa a ter aquela nova relação com o corpo, né? Onde dizem, você nunca usou esse corpo, né? Por isso que você está estranhando completamente tudo, tal. Você vivia nessa simulação, tal. Não por acaso as diretoras também fizeram a transição, né? Durante o processo do filme. Então, mostra bastante, né, essa relação também. Diziam que o filme era sobre capitalismo e aí depois elas falam, não, era sobre a saída da heteronormatividade também. São todas essas normas, todos esses sistemas que nos controlam, tal. E aí a gente pode entrar, acho que num outro ponto, né, que é a transição como algo revolucionário, assim, né? A gente tem muitas acusações de que nós estamos fazendo alguma política da identidade que exclui as outras pessoas, né? Ao invés de
divide.
Incluir, ou divide, né? Mas, ao mesmo tempo, é curioso ver na fala da McKenzie, né? Uma coisa que também me afetou muito, que é como há uma mudança, assim, do que na psicanálise vai chamar do gozo, né? Do que te movimenta, do desejo, assim, desse seu motor mesmo no mundo de querer e de fazer, como há uma transformação quando mexe no gênero, né? E há uma impressão, assim, queria ouvir da McKenzie também, caso isso tenha ressoado nela, né? Parece que como na posição de homem cis hétero, há um desejo de transformar a sociedade e de mudar a sociedade, que é quase uma dominação também. E ao transicionar, parece que você abre esse seu corpo à transformação, ou seja, você começa a perceber que a transformação que você queria fazer fora, numa perspectiva de dominação, de, sabe, você agir no mundo e transformar o resto, acaba se voltando um pouco para dentro. E aí você meio que deixa essa transformação acontecer em você, sabe? E isso mexe, né, muito com o seu desejo, a sua força no mundo, o que você vai fazer, seu trabalho, né? Coisas assim, operações que ficam todo dia na nossa cabeça rodando, né? Programas ficam rodando assim sem parar. E é isso, assim, acho que a McKenzie faz essa conexão entre mundos, tal. Então, acho que seria legal ouvir ela sobre essa crítica que há, né? É política da identidade, né? Tem o marxismo ortodoxo, que você fala também no livro, né? As pessoas veem no marxismo umas técnicas e soluções para os problemas da sociedade, e a gente, quando faz transição, quando está, né, em categorias que são minorizadas, em sistemas de opressões diferentes, vemos outras soluções junto, né? Então seria legal ouvir a McKenzie um pouco sobre isso, assim, como isso aconteceu em você e como você vê isso, esse debate de sociedade hoje, que é muito presente no Brasil.
Yeah, it's funny, after I transitioned, a lot of the straight Marxists stopped taking me seriously at all. But I found a lot of new friends who are more fun, and new intellectual engagements and so on. It's really worth taking so-called identity politics back to where the word came from, and a key source for that is a document by a group that call themselves the Combahee River Collective, who were black women who were mostly gay. And their whole point in that statement is, they'd done movement work in the labor movement that's ignoring the fact that black people's experience is different. And they were doing movement work around black liberation that's ignoring that as women and then as gay women, that their experiences and issues are different. So their version of identity politics is not, we have to have a separate thing. It's that the whole movement has to think about everybody's issues all at the same time, or maybe not all at the same time, but everyone's got to get around to the thing that matters to them, because it's not always the same. So, yeah, there's sort of models of, the sort of Marxist political framework, but it leaves intact the existing family structure, which does not work very well for straight women. So, like, why would anyone want a revolution that doesn't fix that, or that still assumes that heterosexuality is a norm? So it's like, well, then why would I want that, So there's a sense in which the most identity of identity politics is that sort of white, cis-het Marxist revolutionary thing that thinks it's talking about the totality, but it's not. It's talking about this very specific vision that's leaving out everyone else's struggles, As we used to say in the labour movement, an injury to one is an injury to all. So unless you're also dealing with mass incarceration, unless you're also dealing with the undocumented, so how can movements connect those things rather than, sort of push them to the margin? Like these often seemingly marginal issues are really kind of important, And the thing about transness, like trans people, here you might say travesty rather than transgender, not quite the same thing, but let's think about those in parallel. It's maybe 1% or 2% of the population or something. It's like, well, why would we centre this? And often it's like, I really wish we wouldn't. Can I just get on with my life? And, can I just be ordinary? That would be great. But it's it connects through to an entire kind of forced performance of the sex and gender of the body that affects cis people as well. So, if you're going to like police what bathrooms we can go in, a lot of cis people are going to, and invariably cis women, are going to feel the pressure of that as well. Yeah. So it's like, we have to be vigilant, no trans women in the toilets, Well, then it's cis women who don't look ordinary are also going to get caught up in that,
And usually not white.
Exactly. And inevitably it's the standard of what the gendered body is supposed to be is a white standard. And other people's bodies don't fit that and then are policed in different ways. We see this in the Olympics right now, which is, let's not get into that, but, but as an example that people could latch onto. So, yeah, in what way is the control of the body a thing that state and religion between them have sort of carved up, where the denial of the physical autonomy to a trans person to get access to hormones is connected to the state and church authority over access to abortion or to birth control. It's the same issue. Like, these things are connected, So, yeah, can we sort of get out of thinking about identity politics? I think this is sort of like right-wing language at this point, even though Combahee River Collective had very different intentions in calling it that. But where they were really coming from was liberation movements. And can we centre that in our thinking? Like, what do we learn from black liberation as a movement that centres issues that are different? That, for example, the United States centres policing and mass incarceration as an issue. And, how can you separate the struggles of labour from the struggles of people who are doing their labour now in prisons for cents per hour? The United States has slavery again, because that's what this is, the prison system. So that's a class issue, but it's not only that. It's also to do with race, and it's also to do with gender. Why are the bodies of black men demonized in particular ways in American culture? And I can't speak to Brazil on this, but I imagine there's analogies and parallels with these things that would be different and relatable. Yeah, parallel. So, yeah, the thing is, you've got to go further into all of the differences in order to come back to the totality of how these things connect together. Like, your critique of the totality of domination and exploitation has to get into the details to accurately represent, like the bigger picture, And then in relation to movement work, as Audre Lorde used to say, like diversity is our strength. Like, it's a good thing to have this diversity within movements. You just have to be able to have conversations where everyone gets their turn. And, like, white guys don't assume they speak for the totality and everyone else speaks for difference. Everyone speaks for the totality and for difference. And unless everyone knows that, then you have people sort of going off as if they're in charge of everything, when really they're not speaking to the people you need to mobilize. More than half depending on how you measure it, but more than half the working class in the United States is women. 40% are not white people, and that number is increasing. So you sort of have to deal with all of those differences to be able to do movement work, yeah? So I feel like this conversation has been the same one for 40 years, and I really wish people would read the solutions to this that people came up with 40 years ago, you know? But it's sort of like you're sort of like, I'm sort of caricaturing, you know, like the white leftist Marxist dude, you know, but fellas, could you just read Combahee River Collective or read Audre Lorde or read Bell Hooks or who said all this 40 years ago, you know? And the rest of us all read that and tried to figure it out. Mm-hmm. And I don't claim to be an authority on black struggle, but I listen to it. It's a thing for me to learn from, you know, because it's a central tradition. And it's like I got at least that far with it, so then I can be part of the conversation with my comrades about what matters to them, you know, and to try to bring this is what matters to trans people, and this is how those connect to the larger picture. That's how you make kind of progress on this, I think.
E é curioso, assim, eu fiquei me vendo antes da transição, nessas falas, nesse convite que você faz, né? E fico pensando que, na posição de homem cis hétero, você meio que terceiriza o que seria as pautas de identidade, né? Que a gente sabe que é a identificação, que a gente sabe que é, na verdade, a dissidência, né? De gênero e sexualidade, mas vamos tratar assim. Porque parece que não te afeta, né? Parece que a cis-heteronormatividade, a própria branquitude cega a pessoa, né? Ela não consegue ver interesse numa leitura feminista, numa leitura transfeminista ainda muito menos, né? Numa leitura que projete essa profundidade que a McKenzie falou, né? As camadas, onde você tem que ir para depois voltar, né? E é isso, né? A gente consegue falar disso com essa naturalidade porque fez esse percurso, mas é complicado provocar essas outras pessoas que estão... Muitas dizem, posição de privilégio, mas não é só isso, né? É porque realmente há é uma posição ideológica mesmo, né? Como a gente viu em outros episódios com Rita, com outras pessoas falando sobre a ligação gênero e ideologia, né? Então, aí eu trago um pouco do que o vetorialismo, né, e a classe hacker poderiam, de repente, apontar de solução. Você acha que nessa solução que você traz nos livros, né, onde nós estamos em um outro momento, há uma outra classe dominante e é preciso se reorganizar também não mais como classe trabalhadora, mas como classe hacker, né? Como que você vê o papel das pessoas LGBT nessa categoria que você cria, hacker, né? Entendendo que o corpo também é tecnologia, enfim, tudo isso. E até, se puder, falar um pouco sobre as suas teorias que eu apresentei aqui minimamente, né? Então, você pode falar com muito mais propriedade. Por favor, nos dê essa aula.
Yeah, and there's a lot of moving parts to that question. So to tackle it at one end, like what if there was another layer to the ruling class? And it's where thinking Marx together with David Ricardo rather than with Hegel is kind of useful, because in Ricardo, who's one of Marx's key sources in political economy, there's a class struggle going on between landlord and capitalist. There's a class struggle between two ruling classes going on. And Marx adopts the class struggle framework and thinks it in terms of capital and labour. But there's also a part of Marx's work that's still about landlords and rent and the exploitation of the landed masses. All right, so there's more than one mode of production, and there's more than one ruling class, there's more than one subordinate class. What if new ones got added? What would that look like? And to what extent is this partly a story of the evolution of the forces of production? So to what extent does the evolution of techniques make possible new forms of property, new forms of production, but also new forms of exploitation? And that's the Industrial Revolution gives you capitalism, then maybe the Information Revolution gives you whatever we have now. I called it vectoralism, call it what you like, like thinking of vector means a line of fixed length but no fixed position. So it's kind of like it's this long, but it could be there or there. And I sort of think of communication technologies as like that, The cell phone could connect me to your phone or to somebody else's, but it's always the same vector. It has the same technical properties, but it's very flexible in what it connects to what. So it's a sort of very abstract way of thinking, what is technics now? There was an extraordinary evolution of the property form through the 20th century to create forms of private property and information that used to not previously exist. And then a new source of productive energy arises, particularly centered on the university. Universities are connected to the economy in a new way as creators of intellectual property on a scale that they weren't previously, and as socializing the risk in the development of intellectual property. The big tech firms love to say they're innovative, but the really risky stuff was done in universities. They do the stuff they think is going to pay off, So, how did this all change? And does it generate not just a new ruling class that's able to control the value chain through owning and controlling the vector of information? Does it create a new subordinate class, which is those of us who produce information for a living? So what does it mean that pretty much everybody who works with a laptop is producing information that somebody else will get most of the value from? So what if that was a class interest? It's work, but it's not classical industrial labor. Classical industrial labor is based on sameness of the repetition of the production of the same thing on the assembly line is the classic model. But intellectual property always has to be different. Other kinds of property can be the same, but sort of by definition, a piece of code or a book or a song, it doesn't matter, or a TV show, whatever it is, has to be minimally different from those before it to be property. So there's a class that produces that difference, but we don't get to own the value of most of what we create. So I call all of that hacker class. And I think call it what you like. I'm not wedded to this language. We could be digital labor, call it something else if you like. But let's think it as something specific, as having specific interests and specific sites of struggle and particular things that we care about, that I think needs to be in alliance with labor and with peasantry or farmer class. These things are different but connectable, but it helps to think them as different first so that you then actually forge the alliance for real rather than just assume everyone's on the same page. Yeah. So that's the sort of larger political economic landscape, if you like. A new wrinkle is the way that this ruling class is able to exploit non-labor, and that's fairly unprecedented. I think every rising ruling class found a way to get something for free. Colonialism is about that. Let's just go and steal the land, and we'll take all of the timber, and we'll take all of the whatever it is, fish, or we'll just beaver pelts. We'll take it all for a fraction of what it cost nature to produce it. So the whole
millions of slaves as well.
Exactly, and that was a whole other mode of production, right? Yeah. So there's the slave mode is not strictly capitalism. Capitalism based on free labor, quote unquote free. Yeah, so. The slave mode was articulated to the capitalist mode, was articulated to the tenant-farmer mode of production. Okay, maybe there's a new mode of production that is now, all of that is subordinated to control of information and is now able to extract value from us even when we're not working. Just walking around with the cell phone in your pocket is generating information for a bunch of companies and you do not even know who they are. So it will know where you are. It sort of knows where everybody is who's got that phone and has got those applications on it. So you're doing work for someone for which you're not getting paid and don't even think is labor. You look something up on Google, you get the one thing you want from Google, which is now ridiculously unreliable because some AI will have made it up. But Google gets all of everyone's information in the aggregate and is able to aggregate that and use it and exploit it as private property. So we've privatized the information commons in the handful, among a handful of giant corporations. So that's the big picture, and it's bad. And let's not forget currently accelerating the rate at which we destroy the planet and make life itself impossible. It's great. So the energy use of these major corporations like Microsoft and Google is rising. It's completely unsustainable. Fabulous. The thing is that within any era of exploitation and domination, people have little everyday strategies and tactics for producing the best possible life that you can with the resources that are available. And trans people or travesty people are resourceful because you have to be, because the structure has been against you since the colonial era. So where are the little spaces of possibility within that? And they change. So the kinds of labor that trans people have been able to do, the kinds of ways of getting access and sharing resources have changed over time. And there's been benefits for us in this particular era. The internet enabled a lot of us to come out because we could get access. I didn't know. I didn't even know what words to use to look up books in the library. Like, what am I? I don't know. I read both volumes of the Kinsey survey on sexuality. Because I didn't even know should I read the men volume or the woman volume? I don't know which one I am. And neither of them are very helpful, so it wasn't great. There's no golden age in the modern world for trans or travesty people, But there's a way that people have been able to use the current resources. There is weirdly a little pocket of mostly trans women in tech, and I've never found a good explanation for how we ended up in that niche, But most trans people are a kind of super exploitable surplus population, You've got regular labor that's exploited, but the labor market's segmented. So, all right, here's exploited labor, and here's labor that's exploited even more because of racialization and gender. And here's labor that's super, super exploited because it's trans or visibly queer. So, for example, trans women ending up, nothing against sex work, but ending up with no choice but to do that, or ending up in nightlife because there are the niches. The way trans men used to do the physical manual labor that no one else wanted to do. And then the shutting down of manufacturing cuts out that niche. So trans men had to find other places in the economy, where they could find their way. So you could say trans people have always been hackers in that sense of the hack where you have to take the given circumstances and make of it what you can to make something possible that you can live, because that's one of the senses of the hack, It's not always the most sort of elegant or elaborate. It's the path that makes a thing possible using the techniques that are available and the time that's available and the resources that are available. So, yeah, I could sort of connect the themes of my work for the last 25 years together through the hackers I was around when I wrote Hacker Manifesto were sort of a combination of people from programming, sort of movement politics, sort of media avant-gardes, art avant-gardes going, internet got cheap and it's readily available and we can use machines to make music, let's create a new world with these tools, And we had a little playground for a while where we could do all that. That was my first version of hackers. But these days it's actually hormones are pretty cheap and easy to get. And you can hack your body with that. And you can kind of create space using the techniques of the club and the techniques of a little space online to kind of create a possible world for ourselves. So I think I ended up going from one pocket of hackers to another one. And that's sort of the story of my life.
É muito interessante, assim, a gente levou a Mackenzie no terreiro ontem, e eu acho que, a Mackenzie traz na experiência do raving, essa introdução de um novo device, um novo dispositivo que é seu próprio corpo, e a experimentação disso em ambientes diferentes, no momento que você percebe até o ambiente que ela estava, a casa, a universidade, etc., eram ambientes que não permitiam ela descobrir seu corpo, Ela precisou colocar em um ambiente diferente. Então, tem esse poder também de como a gente se descobre em movimento, assim, acessando esses outros espaços, essas outras redes de pessoas, Mas principalmente como a gente descobre o nosso corpo como uma tecnologia também, Que a gente vive numa época tão materialista, tão centrada assim, em tecnologias digitais. Claro, há 2 décadas, 3 décadas, nada disso existia. Então, é natural o fascínio, né, que a gente tem por todo esse cyberespaço, né, o metaverso, essas coisas. Mas acho que ressalta muito da vida mesmo da McKenzie, né, essa importância da gente se entender como também essa tecnologia configurável, operável, né, e como isso vai mudar todo o seu ao redor, toda a sua interferência no mundo, né, o que você é capaz de trocar com o mundo, né, e como isso muda completamente a sua abordagem, assim, suas soluções. Até ouso assim, perguntar se você acha que se você tivesse feito a transição na infância, você acha que você teria passado pelo marxismo?
It's entirely possible, given that one of the classics of transliterature in English language is Stonebridge Blues by Leslie Feinberg. It's a Marxist book, and it's like, I really wish people read it more often, because Leslie Feinberg starts out as a butch lesbian and then tries being a trans man, and is then a kind of non-conforming trans-masc person. Like, they go through this whole journey at the same time as they're involved in struggles of organised labour. So there's two struggles going on at once. One is the daytime struggle about the factory, and the other is the nighttime struggle about can queer and trans people have a space free from the police and the mafia, So it's the two struggles together. So, there's this rich, queer Marxist tradition. Harry Hay, who invented the radical fairy movement, started out in the Communist Party, and then as a co-founder of the Mattachine Society, which is the first gay rights organization in America, So it's definitely there, there was always those sorts of connections. It's often not good for trans people to dwell on the what I should have done question, I first felt like I needed to transition when I was about 18, and that would have been around 1980. And if I had transitioned, then I would not be alive now. Trans people who came out before anybody even knew what HIV was are mostly not with us. And we talk about the generation of gay men that we lost to HIV, and that's important. But let's not forget drug users is another population to treat with respect as humans who we lost. But also trans people, because of having to do sex work, because of being more likely to be so fucked up that you're also a drug user and so on. So there's a generation missing, So I don't like to dwell too much on what would have happened. But I'd like to think if I'd managed to stay alive, instead of choosing the path of middle-class life and safety, which I have to own, that's what I did, yeah? I would like to think there's a possibility that those things would have, threaded together. Because I was politicized when I was about 15, by things that had happened in Australian politics. That preceded even knowing, I know what sex was, or what gender was. I was just capitalism's bad. Whatever this is, let's change it. I was thinking that as a teenager. So but I think frankly the books would have been better if I'd had this additional perspective. But you then sort of realize every perspective has its limitations. No one has your access to thinking the big picture always has the little picture that you see it through. And that's actually great. And the thing is to be able to put those alongside each other, so different people's little picture point towards overlapping versions of big pictures that never quite add up, and that's okay. So, what I think the totality of the sort of global system of exploitation and domination is different to Paul Preciado, who's there in the book stack, But it's okay that we have different perspectives because we have different little picture bases that it comes from. Neither of us has to be right about everything, and I'm definitely not. Can't speak for Paul. So I think that's sort of not thinking there's one absolutely right theory of everything, that it really takes cooperative, collaborative labor where our big pictures are only ever going to overlap to sort of make a social world where the organization of knowledge is not entirely based on knowledge or domination. Because at the moment, that's often our choice, yeah? So it's like, oh, well, the free market will decide which ideas were right and see how that's working out. That got us Donald Trump and you Bolsonaro. Or let's just have domination, and so some powerful person will say what's right, which is then where that ends up, yeah? All right, so neither of those things work. So what is a comradely way of articulating different knowledges, different experiences, different connections to labor together? Like that, to me, is the larger problem of surviving the 21st century, is figuring that out. Because if we don't, we're not going to make it, you know, like it really is that bad. And so to be able to even do that on the smaller scale. But it's where, yeah, it kind of helps to take the perspective of, for example, Anglophone trans people, you know, like this tiny little population. That can teach you one thing. There's no such thing as the natural body. Like, when we think of technology, we think of like a new thing, but a toothbrush is a technology. You know, like a piece of string is it's technology all the way down, and the tool precedes the human. So the stone tool and the hand evolved together over, you know, tens of thousands of years. You know, we were never not technical. And there's no natural body. Like, we're all held together by prosthesis of one sort or another. What happens is that provokes all sorts of anxieties around boundaries. The Matrix movie is an example of this. Like, oh no, I don't know what the boundaries of myself, and I don't know where my humanity is. So then you scapegoat someone as the unnatural body. Oh, transsexuals are the unnatural body so that I can feel like my cis body is. Meanwhile, I'm taking all these pills and I need all of these tools to get through my day. There's no natural body, yeah? And there's a vertigo to having to accept that. But then that's also helpful. Oh, well, we're always already implicated in the technical, but we're implicated now in technical systems that aren't sustainable. How do you hack that? How do you create a version of it that will work? Little example of that is how trans people figure out what works for themselves, you know, because most of us have seen doctors who know less about it than we do, about our specific needs. So I respect endocrinology as a field and people who studied it, but they have to know a wide range of it. I only need to know this very specific set of hacks of endocrinology to get my hormones to work, and boy, have I studied it. And I'm trained as a scholar. I know what a real academic journal is versus some random blog post. Like, I can tell the difference, so I know how to do research. So I've had to explain to my providers, here's why I think I should be on progesterone, because of these studies, empirical studies of why it's beneficial for the bone health of cis women, proven to be on it, so let me have it too. You know, and my endocrinologist is like, oh, I haven't read that. I'm like, it's in the leading journal in your field. You know, it's like, so like, we know things. We figure things out that are specific to our particular needs. So not necessarily to just center that example of transness, but everyone has a knowledge of something. Like, everyone is capable of producing a knowledge out of the labor that they do to make their everyday life. And what if we respected that? Not always to agree that everyone's right. It's not relativism. People can have the most batshit crazy ideas about what they're doing, but to respect the possibility that from whatever labor you're doing, you'll create a view of the world, and some of it can be right. And then we have to find the relationship between those to hack the planet in such a way that life endures.
Acho que uma provocação que a gente podia fazer para McKenzie, assim, já para caminhar para o final. Não, né? Então vou continuar. Convidar, né, McKenzie, você agora é uma programadora e o mundo é o seu software. Você está programando ele, né? Você está reconfigurando ele porque ele não está atendendo o objetivo que foi planejado, assim, para ele, né? O que você mudaria nele, assim? É óbvio que a gente sabe das teses principais, né, do vetorialismo, né, a classe dominante e tal, mas quais seriam as suas programações, assim, para fazer com que esse mundo voltasse ao eixo, assim, considerando também essas questões de gênero que a gente traz, considerando, né, enfim, a parte mais política, institucional. Por que eu estou falando isso, né? Porque para mim foi bem marcante, assim, ver agora na Venezuela, né, o pronunciamento, que eu até mandei para a McKenzie, pronunciamento de uma aliança militar da Venezuela, reagindo, né, ao golpe lá que está sendo tentado. E na fala da pessoa que está responsável pela liderança daquela aliança, ela fala assim, os Estados Unidos estão nos dando um golpe, e é um golpe não só de informação, mas também de cyberativismo, acontece também no universo digital, e nós precisamos trabalhar agora com soberania, nós precisamos trabalhar nossa soberania, inclusive aqui, né, uma soberania cognitiva, né, essa liderança fala, assim. E é muito interessante porque a gente vive nesse sistema onde as plataformas estão gerando subjetividades, né? Nosso envolvimento com as tecnologias digitais é tamanho que a gente está completamente refém, nossa comunicação, nossa informação desse controle. Outro exemplo, recentemente o Instagram proibiu conteúdo político como uma feature uma funcionalidade que foi ativada, né? Então pronto.
Sim, ativada a priori, não é?
Ativada
nem
sem nossa opção. Outra opção agora, dessas funcionalidades novas. Elon Musk, Twitter, decide que você precisa entrar em uma configuração para desativar, parecida com essa do Instagram, né? Você precisa ir lá desativar o uso de todas as informações do Twitter para alimentar a nova inteligência artificial que ele está criando, né? Então, mais uma vez, uma decisão imposta, assim, né, da Big Tech pra gente, como sempre mas, enfim, isso são processos mais flagrantes, assim, né. Outro exemplo, Google agora é processado nos Estados Unidos, ou teve alguma decisão judicial desfavorável ao Google, onde o Google foi culpado de monopólio, né, pelos negócios que ele mantinha com o fabricante celular que fixava o navegador padrão como o do Google em todos os celulares que vinham. E ninguém ia lá configurar para mudar. Né? Então, a gente tem essa espécie de política das funcionalidades, e essas funcionalidades nas plataformas direcionando nosso dia a dia, né? Vou trazer mais uma, que eu falo muito até. O autoplay. A gente que é mais antiga, a gente sabe que houve uma época na internet que não tinha autoplay. Você tinha que clicar para o vídeo funcionar. Depois que o autoplay se juntou ao feed, nossa córnea ficou viciada nas telas, né? A gente não consegue mais desgrudar. Então, eu quero brincar um pouco com isso, assim, né? O que você acha que seria assim configurável nesse mundo para uma saída agora, considerando essas questões também, né, de gênero além de política? E me fala se foi uma pergunta muito ampla, muito complexa.
Yeah, and there's several pieces to that because it's a complicated picture. And the first is the design of technical systems that maximize the centralization of control, surveillance, and capacity, rent extraction. There's sort of like at least three values you could point to that. It's all right, everything from the hardware to the software of that laptop or your phone is sort of not really designed for your needs at all. It's designed around the needs of a series of corporations that are sort of at war with each other about which of their systems of control will control which components of the whole sort of integrated stack of techniques that's between you doing something on the laptop and its effect in the world, yeah? So Apple's got the hardware piece, and you might be using their software, but you might then also be using Google, and then not only is you're shopping on Amazon, they control a huge piece of the internet backbone that you're not even directly aware is there, and so on. So they're all sort of struggling for control, market share, but really to extract rent, to get to the point where they're in quasi-monopoly positions and can extract rent. So there's that dimension of it. The other dimension of it is that this is what you could call a post-broadcast era, And I grew up in the broadcast era. There were 5 television stations and like maybe about 7 radio stations, and that was it, That was the media. And we thought it was terrible and we wanted to overthrow it, And in retrospect, it wasn't so terrible because while it centered a kind of limited model of what your political and social and cultural options were, at least it had a bit of a noise filter in it. So most things in the news were mostly true, and you can't even say that anymore. Like most of the news is not mostly true if you're just randomly looking at the internet, So it had, it could halt the positive feedback loop of noise was the one merit of the broadcast system. The downside of the broadcast system is that most of us were simply invisible in it or with a bad other. Like who is the trans woman in television? Like either the murderer or the victim. There were like 2 jobs, so it actually wasn't great. But we replaced it with something that's worse, where, there isn't a way of generating a kind of constraint on positive feedback loops where a piece of information, regardless of whether it's true or not, that attracts attention, just attracts more attention. And there's value to be extracted out of attention, so the owners of this media ecology don't care that bad attention is circulating information that is, you'll pardon the expression, batshit crazy. Sometimes that's amusing, like it's now a meme that the Republican vice presidential candidate in America had sex with a sofa at some point. And I'm like, great. For once, one of the most ridiculous made-up stories, and the Republicans are so mad about it. And it's like, y'all seized power and kept it by lying about everything in information ecologies where there's no negative feedback to roll back nonsense, So, the first part of it is control, but the control is solely aimed at the maintenance of monopolies and then lack of control that lets disinformation just kind of circulate wildly. So it's sort of like the worst of both worlds in that sense. I think you would actually want freedom and openness around platforms and around the structure of the vector, but you might actually want some error correction so that we're not just like rapidly circulating the most ridiculous rumors you could possibly ever think of, because it's starting to undermine even the possibility of something like scholarship, like the whole point of peer review in an academic context is at least other people have got to verify that what you're claiming is a fact or a valid theory actually is. Some other people will anonymously sign off, yep, we think that's probably right. And, then sometimes later you find out it wasn't, but because there's often this is now a right-wing meme. It's like, oh, this study got debunked, so the whole of scholarship is nonsense. And it's like, no, it's good that it got debunked. We found a result that doesn't hold up because there's a system for finding that, and it's called scholarship, and it used to matter. There was like one thing that was keeping us from imagining the earth is flat, And, journalism has its limitations. It's never been a perfect system, and it's mostly about selling advertising. But, there were standards for whether or not someone actually said something or an event actually happened, and those don't apply anymore, So that's the problem, is that we created a kind of psychotic media environment where the planet itself is ungovernable. So finding any island of information stability in it is a task not only of politics, culture, but of knowledge. Can we stabilize pieces of knowledge that hold people together in patterns that are sustainable and not harmful to each other or their environment? To give some sort of definition for what knowledge would be, and that could include scientific knowledge, spiritual knowledge, cultural knowledge, social science knowledge, the framework of legal decision, like they all have their place, and they're a patchwork of ways of knowing and managing the world that interact in an imperfect way. But I think the big fear is that we're losing their ability to manage anything at all.
Interessante, porque eu fiz uma apresentação essa semana, né, na Semana de Computação da Unicamp, e eu estava levando para eles um breve histórico do que foi essa ascensão dos vetorialistas, te mencionei lá, tudo. E passo ali pela bolha, né, .com nos anos 2000, mas faço também a relação com a informatização do sistema financeiro ali pela década de 70, etc. E aí, a partir também da pesquisa que a gente já conversou, do Transnational Institute, que fala sobre a relação do dinheiro mesmo, né, que financiou a explosão da Big Tech lá por 2008, junto com a crise financeira global, né, com Lehman Brothers, etc. Eu trago essa visão assim de como isso se constitui e esse esquema de poder por trás que a gente às vezes resume como Big Tech, mas que no fundo tem vários códigos, né? E quando a gente olha a relação da diretoria, primeiro você já vê que na diretoria quais são as principais figuras? Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg. Você pode citar 4, 5 aí do GAFAM, né? Que é a sigla para Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft. São homens brancos, né? Norte global, na maioria. E aí você vê quem está por trás desses homens. Quais são os fundos de investimento que estão gerenciando os investimentos nessas plataformas para que elas atinjam a escala a ponto delas se equipararem a um Estado nacional e invadir eles para comercializar seus serviços, como é o Uber, por exemplo, no mundo inteiro, né? E aí, quem está por trás desses fundos? Aí você chega às mesmas identidades, os mesmos homens brancos do norte global gerenciando os fundos de investimento, né? Aí, não, ok, isso deve ser uma tecnologia. Aí você vai para a lista da Forbes, as pessoas mais ricas do mundo. Você vai ter, talvez entre as 20 pessoas mais ricas, homens brancos, possivelmente norte global. Um ou outro não é do norte global, né? Então você percebe que não é suficiente a gente pensar essa revolução, né, contra esse sistema de opressão sem falar sobre gênero, né, sem falar sobre raça, sem fazer algum tipo de hackeamento que passe por esses conhecimentos, né? Por isso legal McKenzie trazendo, né, a junção desses campos de estudo, né? Então a importância de vocês fazer um estudo de gênero, conversar com a parte de, sei lá, user experience, sabe? O que é muito comum, na verdade. Você vai fazer um formulário, tá lá.
Gênero.
Sexo, masculino ou feminino, né?
Sim.
Então, assim, isso mostra como é importante a gente ter essas coisas, né, em conversa, assim.
Eu vi isso ontem num formulário de pesquisa de intenção de voto para a Prefeitura de São Paulo. Só tinha masculino e feminino, então aparentemente pessoas trans não votam, gente.
Isso.
Acabamos de descobrir que...
Não tem nem documento,
não
né?
tem,
Então eu provoquei, assim, porque também acho que ao fazer a transição tardia, eu fui, de certa forma, beneficiada, né? Por ser, pelo menos aqui no Brasil, né, uma pessoa branca, né? E tive nessa posição do homem cis hétero, então eu tive um acesso à tecnologia, consegui desenvolver um conhecimento sobre tecnologia que dificilmente eu conseguiria se tivesse feito a transição cedo, né? Essa é um pouco também da provocação de... Você acha que você estaria no marxismo? Porque eu não sei se eu estaria na tecnologia, né? Como você também trouxe, poderia nem estar viva. Então, é interessante, assim... Quais seriam, de repente, umas soluções que a gente poderia criar, né? Que fosse capaz de escancarar por trás dos vetorialistas, né? Todo esse pacto que tem de branquitude, de masculinidade, né? De heterossexualidade, para que a gente consiga efetivamente quebrar isso, né? Efetivamente fazer uma mudança no sistema que não seja só uma nova feature, e sim algo estrutural, né?
There's a provocation in William Gibson's, I think it's a Neuromancer, the first of, where the ruling class in this imaginary future is no longer even human. And I want to relate that to, I don't know who said this is not a line that's original to me, but I remember reading, like today's tech billionaires don't have human problems. Like they have one remaining human problem, which is that they're going to die. So they're investing for their personal lives in like bizarre like health plan stuff, like they're doing all sorts of weird unproven therapies, And it's like, I'm sorry, you're like richer than anyone's ever been in the entire history of the planet. You're still going to die, 100 years tops. then you're just, like you're going to be a vegetable. Like you're just going to be mush. And I'm kind of like, oh, maybe you can extend your life to 120 years, and the last 20 years will be misery, So they have one human problem left. So they're kind of incapable of thinking in terms of the resistance the world puts up to you that actually makes you think and come up with solutions to things that are relevant to life. They're not capable of thinking that anymore. So, yeah, like one gets to that.
Nem com o Neuralink novo do Elon Musk ele vai conseguir pensar essas coisas, né?
Who needs this? What do we need? Clean water. We need clean water. We need ways to adapt food systems to a climate that's already unstable.
A world public service for the next pandemic.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. We need like cheap vaccines. But no, none of that's of interest,
Just
and
the metaverso.
To be clear, there's some actual real applications of so-called AI that are kind of interesting, but they're very specific and niche, as is often the case with these things. It's like, if you had ways of sorting through reliable information about the structure of known molecules, you could probably find some unknown ones, and those might be drugs you could test. Like that's the sort of application of a technology. But it's not one that makes anyone trillions of dollars. It's one that makes someone slightly rich. So no, we had to go, shove AI into every single application everywhere to produce like nonsense information that will need feedback on itself, so that your Google results just kind of get worse every time you look at it. And this will be probably the third tech crash of my lifetime, because I remember the one of 2000. Like it fell apart in 2000, 2008, and there'll probably be another one, because it's sort of, like, to be clear, like some of it's real and works and does something interesting, but it's been overinvested in and overextended to do things it won't do. So, okay, but, like the thing about vectoralist class as a ruling class, like capitalist class as a ruling class and landlord class as a ruling class, is based on constant expansion. That's quantitative rather than qualitative. It just has to keep growing and growing beyond the point the planet will sustain, which is why they have fantasies about Mars. But it doesn't actually qualitatively deliver anything much that anybody much needs anymore. There was a moment when the development of digital technologies actually did things for us and helped us. But I think the consensus is a lot of that era is over. And it's now much more about rent-seeking and extracting the last little bit of juice out of all of it. Because there was like one new technology on the horizon, which was AI, and it's probably not going to work out in exactly the way that's anticipated, whatever pieces of it remain. So we've reached that kind of, it's like stasis moment when political economies then start looking for really pretty desperate solutions. It's when you're at an impasse in that kind of accumulation that the ruling class is like, maybe we'll try fascism. Let's do that again, Oh, okay. Like, what is it? Move fast and break things? Like, let's break the government. Like, let's break the human soul and see if we can make money out of what falls out of it, the pennies that fall to the ground. So, yeah, like, I'm sort of pessimistic about where we are with some of that, but how do we build what we can, where we can, on all of the fronts that matter to actual everyday human life. Like how do we build the good life now in pieces, knowing that that's not enough and knowing that that can't be just compensation for a larger system that doesn't work, but as components of what we actually need to survive now and hopefully in whatever futures remain that are available to us.
Você comentou agora do fascismo, né? E a gente trouxe alguns livros relacionados à conversa, né? De alguma forma. E esse livro do Antonio Scurati, ele é bem interessante porque pega as cartas de todo o momento assim do fascismo surgindo, né? Onde você percebe o Mussolini como um bundão. Traduz aí bundão, para McKenzie. Um bundão que não faz a revolução com os outros anarquistas ali. Ele fica em cima do muro até a hora H, onde ele finalmente consegue se juntar com a burguesia, etc., e realizar, né, as ações que geram o fascismo com os fachos de combatimento. E você percebe que tudo começa num sentimento assim de homens que voltam da guerra e ficam frustrados que não tem protagonismo na sociedade. Como assim? A gente foi pra guerra, matou um monte de gente, morreu, tal, voltou e ninguém liga pra gente. Né? Enquanto a Itália estava na época no socialismo, né, no comunismo e tal. É interessante ver o gênero também nesse movimento tradicional, que as pessoas hoje acham que, né, não tem nada a ver gênero com fascismo. Não, tem tudo a ver, gente, tem tudo a ver. Né? O Preciado, a gente já conversou sobre o livro, né? O Caliban e a Bruxa também, como essa origem da opressão de gênero. Eu provocando você para uma solução, e a gente tem aqui a crítica ao tecnosolucionismo do Morozov, né? Que faz essa crítica à solução assim mágica tecnológica. Aqui a gente tem Como Fazer Política Sem Identidade, da Maíra, que fala um pouco sobre como quebrar um pouco criar uma espécie de política feminina, né? Uma política do feminino, assim, com recursos como psicanálise. O Manifesto Comunista, que, né, está na base do seu Manifesto Hacker. Um pouco de inspiração da Umbanda, que a McKenzie foi ontem e gostou muito. Até foi para a casa de Exu, né? Importante falar. Aliás, essa madrugada, Exu Mulher foi premiado como livro que
é o Jabuti.
Jabuti acadêmico, assim. Exu Mulher. Existe Exu e Exu Mulher, olha que coisa, né? E não é só binaridade, é o contrário. É tudo junto. Bom, teoria feminista e a extinção da internet também, um pouco nesse pessimismo do que McKenzie trouxe, né? De que a gente não sei quanto futuro nos falta, né? Aqui, nesse livro, há a proposição de uma bifurcação da internet, né? Onde a gente iria para uma linha diferente dessa atual que domina desde mais ou menos 2008, né? Onde teve a grande explosão, assim, e o grande controle das big techs, que hoje chega até aos cabos submarinos, né? E acaba por dominar completamente nossa comunicação e informação. Mas agora sim, a gente está indo para o final. Já estamos chegando aqui no horário. A gente costuma convidar as pessoas a compartilhar leituras que estão fazendo, séries que estão assistindo, músicas que estão ouvindo, coisas assim, nesse momento final, para você trazer para a gente novas referências, a gente continuar a conversa através de outros materiais.
My mind always goes blank when I'm asked this. The book I brought to read is actually Alberto Toscano, which is a book called Late Fascism. So I've had thoughts about that. I actually there's some things I disagree with in that book, but it's a really helpful summing up of what the sort of Marxist tradition had to say about fascism really since the 1920s. So that book's been really useful for thinking through the current moment. A book I'd love to recommend, and someone should translate it into Portuguese, is a book called Faults. It's the title's in Spanish in the English version, by Cecilia Gentili, who is a very important trans woman in the New York scene and nationally in the United States, who died unexpectedly last year. And Faltas is her account of growing up as someone that her hometown in Argentina recognized was queer. And, you know, Cecilia doesn't know she's a trans woman, but everyone knows she's something, you know? And so she then becomes exploitable by everyone in the town. And it's this book that recounts sort of the sexual economy of exploitation of this small Argentine city from the point of view of this child, who everyone has identified as other and therefore usable, including cis women, you know, including her own mother. And it's sort of, the subtitle is something like Letters to Everyone in My Hometown Except My Rapist. And it's sort of like an accounting of how that works. I think it's going to be relatable for people in lots of places. So I kind of really highly recommend Cecilia Gentili's Faltas, which you can get in English or Spanish already if you want to read it in one of those languages. So yeah, it's my two recommendations for now.
Ai, muito bom.
Boa. Amanda me lembrou de um ponto aqui. A gente já fez essa pergunta final, mas vamos terminar talvez nesse clima aqui. Porque eu acho que é um clima legal que abre caminhos. Aproveitando, estamos aqui também com a presença de Ogum nesse episódio, né? O orixá da tecnologia, enfim. Claro que sempre o seu Zé aqui também acompanhando. E hoje tem até um batonzinho aqui para Pombagira ou Exu Mulher, quem preferir estar presente. Eu presenciei, como a gente já conversou, numa experiência de hackeamento do setor público, de hackeamento do governo dessa cidade que a gente está, São Paulo, né, que a gente chama de prefeitura, uma rejeição muito grande, tanto a essa ética hacker, essa lógica de criar diferença, né, de tirar...
Encontrar caminhos.
De encontrar caminhos, de sair de caminhos tradicionais para montar soluções que sejam mais criativas, mais... Não quero usar inovadora... nem vanguarda, que você também não gosta, alguma coisa que seja alternativa, assim, como solução. E então eu percebo uma fobia, assim, a duas coisas principais. A tecnologia em si, muito associada no pensamento da esquerda como algo que vai tirar empregos, algo que aliena e não algo que soluciona efetivamente problemas, né? E a outra, a fobia a essa ética hacker, a essa possível conjuntura de assuntos que acaba por criar soluções diferentes, né? Então, métodos não tradicionais, solução de problemas, etc. Eu lembro que houve até a verbalização disso, assim, são pessoas muito ativistas, muito hacktivistas, né? Não é o lugar, assim, né? O setor público não seria o lugar. O que depois mudou, hoje em dia, essas pessoas são melhores vistas, né, dentro também do setor público, depois de tudo que a gente passou com junho de 2013, que se assemelha ao Occupy Wall Street e tudo mais, né, que veio com os golpes, etc. A parte do ativismo na política ficou muito mais aceitável depois disso, porque percebeu-se que era uma hipocrisia. É necessário fazer uma política por completo e não só aquela política institucional, né? Então eu queria, na verdade, te convidar também a refletir com a gente sobre como combater essas fobias, tanto a tecnologia, que você traz muito bem no Capital Está Morto, né, ao fazer a quebra dos argumentos dos marxistas no seu bingo, né? Você faz um bingo assim do marxista e vai quebrando esses argumentos, né? Enfim, há essas duas coisas, assim, como fazer o hacktivismo, fazer a tecnologia fluir melhor nesses ambientes que são importantes para a gente criar políticas, criar, né, tipos de enfim, leis, etc., que possam ir modificando a sociedade para algo mais justo, igualitário, etc.
Yeah, I mean, and I already made the first point is that to be human is to be technical. There's no human outside the technical. Like our bodies and lives are not sustainable without a technics, and we're not even the only animal of whom that's true, like birds have technics. It's called a nest, like other species do it too. Like you have to create a relation, an intermediate relation to the world through a tool. And with humans, it's then also with technical systems. So it's more a politics and a culture of, can we be involved in the struggle around what kinds of technical systems are democratic and life-sustaining and open to different needs and diversities of culture, like that's sort of more the struggle around techniques than rather, is technology good or bad? It's just a boring question because like the answer is yes and no or both and, Technology is good and bad, like all right, over it, done, That's even in Marx, like Marx has like this sort of dialectical understanding of it, So it's sort of important to always have that piece present in sort of thinking through any more specific kind of movement issue, so like how in this particular setting with these goals is our choices around techniques, how much agency do we even have over that? But if we have a choice of, should our movement have a website? The answer isn't always yes. Should we be addressing this issue through an Instagram account? Maybe, maybe not, Should I be a podcaster? Well, sometimes, but not everyone should do that, So, yeah, and how does it relate to community that's embodied in physical space? And I think at the moment it is worth heading back in that direction a little bit. So it's not humans together good, technology bad. Humans being together in the same place is also a technology. You know, for us to all occupy space, it doesn't work without modern plumbing, let me tell you, and that's a technology, you know. But I think, particularly since the pandemic, a lot of us retreated back into, you know, work from home, and my entire cultural and social life is mediated. Let's pull back a bit from that and think about what balances the senses, what balances screen-based interaction versus the involvement of the body. You know, I sort of think there's media politics around that a little bit to get us a bit out of the sort of situation of being isolated, screen-based, having your attention, you know, sort of really drawn to stuff that's not going to be helpful and sustaining for you. Back towards techniques that puts us back in the same room, which for me is dancing. For some might be an umbanda practice. You know, there are many things, and they play different roles. So yeah, like what's the technical, media, cultural, social interactive dimension of things that forward the possibility of an enjoyable and sustainable life? You know, like that's sort of the question to be asking, rather than sort of technically good or bad, you know. And our agency's limited around some of these things, given the scale of the infrastructure the vectoralist class built, you know. So it's like you don't undo that in a minute, but where in it can we find little pockets of sustainability for ourselves and the world?
Razão. Tem algo que a gente não conversou aqui que você gostaria de falar, que você acha que é um espaço assim, né, importante para você falar com a comunidade de tecnologia brasileira, com a comunidade LGBT também? Que você tem algo assim que você sente aí que precisa ser dito?
Keep on doing what you're doing. That's all I've got, because I've been in Brazil for 3 days, so I would never pretend to tell other people what to do. I'm here to sort of learn and observe, and it's been fascinating, and I'm very honoured to have had the opportunity to come here.
Ai, que ótimo. Obrigada, McKenzie.
Obrigado.
Por ter estado com a gente aqui em mais esse Entre Amigues, que também é tecnopolítica ao mesmo tempo. E que você venha para o Brasil várias vezes e que a gente consiga conversar muito mais e trocar essas experiências que, infelizmente, muitas vezes ficam mediadas pelas diferenças de língua, né? Tantas coisas que a McKenzie escreveu e que a gente ainda não teve acesso, porque não está em português. Tantas coisas que a gente trouxe aqui que estão em português, que a McKenzie ainda não pôde ter acesso. Então, é muito legal quando a gente pode fazer essas conversas.
Reforça o valor das editoras também, que estão aí fazendo esse trabalho, né? Comprem os livros, apoiem.
Sim, editoras independentes, galera.
Editoras independentes. Tem também a tradução do Filosofia para Aranhas, que a gente não citou, né? O pessoal também, que vai ser lançada essa semana.
Sim.
Então, tem muita coisa chegando.
E agradecer a pessoa que não está aparecendo, mas que está lá no fundo, a Eduarda, que está aqui promovendo essa tradução simultânea para a gente conseguir fazer esse episódio funcionar e cada pessoa aqui poder conversar na sua língua e ser inteligente na sua língua. E muito obrigada, foi muito legal e que bom que vocês estiveram com a gente em mais um Entre Amigues especial / Tecnopolítica.
Primeiro internacional, né?
Primeiro internacional, ainda virão muitos, gente. Muito obrigada e até a próxima.
Tchau, até a próxima.
Thanks to the crew.